The meeting will begin in 1 minute. The meeting will begin in 1 minute. Thank you.
Well, I call this meeting to order and welcome to the January 16th Informational City Council meeting. Our first order of business this afternoon is a report from Councilor Rolfing on the Urbanized Development Commission.
Thank you. We met last Thursday, the 11th, out at Seacog Building. Our agenda was pretty packed. We did some appointments of new members to the TAC, or Technical Advisory Committee, along with the Citizens Advisory Committee, and those were approved. We did a small change to a plan. I think it was just a few $1,000s to make up for some money moving into from 2016 to 17. Safety performance measures, we talked about that. And we approved it. The state set some standards for how things are supposed to be built, et cetera, and those were approved. The tip, there was another change in that, a small change. The City of Sioux Falls bicycle and pedestrian connection path. Some information was given by Sam Trebelcock on connecting everything inside, well, not even inside the interstate, but connecting like 18th Street and a couple 3 going east and west, a couple 3 going north and south of streets, so that they can have a bicycle path, a clear bicycle path to get to our path around the city, and then either from downtown to out to that, or from out into that area. So that was really interesting what they're planning on doing with that. It's going to be a great step. Lastly, we talked about the ADA transition plan and how we're doing that with changing the sidewalks, putting in the ADA accessible curbs or runways out to the street, if you will, and how that's going to happen, and the ones that how close we are to getting it done. And we've really, in Sioux Falls, done a great job of getting that done in a timely manner. So that's basically the report.
Thank you, Councilor Rolfing. Okay, our first presentation, well, excuse me, before we go to presentations, City Council open discussion. Any items for open discussion?
I have one quick. Thank you.
Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor. One of the things that I wanted to bring up this afternoon is that we had a holiday yesterday, the observance of Martin Luther King Jr. And what I noticed in the city is that all of our community centers, our libraries were closed while the public schools had school yesterday. And it really affects a lot of families that use those facilities. Some of our most vulnerable citizens use our libraries in different locations as part of it. And if we're truly having a community center or a public library, we should be available for those services during the times when people are off work. Those that observe the holiday were looking for other things. So as we approach the budget season and start looking at it, I think that's something that we need to take a look at as a council to make that a priority, or if that's a policy that we need to establish to have those facilities open. I've noticed it on other federal holidays, and those are the times when people have access and ability to use our facilities, and then we have them closed. So, of course, it's going to be a reallocation of assets and how we fund that. But at the same time, if we're going to have community centers, we should have them open when the community is available to use them. So, just an observation and something that I'll try to figure out a way to work into the budget in a time of limited resources.
Any other items for open discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll move then into our first presentation, which is entitled Plumbing, Let's Get Acquainted. And Mark Polly is going to be our Chief Plumbing Inspector, will be presenting on this topic. Welcome.
Welcome. Good afternoon, council members. I am Mark Polly. I'm the Chief Plumbing Inspector for the City of Sioux Falls. And the first thing I would like to do is to introduce my team. First member and the newest member I have is Justin Blaine, if you'd please stand. Justin has been with us for 2 years. It'll actually be 3 years next month when I do his review. Justin started plumbing in 1998. My next member, newest member, is Dan Waddell. Dan Waddell has been with us for 6.5 years and started plumbing in 1976. He started also, he was went to school at Mitchell at Votech when they had their plumbing courses over there. My next inspector is Mick Hillstead. Mick he's been with the city for 12 years, and he started plumbing in 1983. And Mick is actually a second-generation plumbing inspector for the city of Sioux Falls. His dad, Jim, was also an inspector here for roughly 28 to 30 years. So we're glad to have him here.
Very cool.
I have been with the city for 13 years, and I was actually the first plumbing class that Mitchell had when they started up their plumbing program. And I started plumbing after that in 1975. So as you can see, the plumbing of Sioux Falls is well represented. We have a total of 36 years of plumbing experience. Plumbing dates back a long time. As you see in some of your pictures here, Romans were some of the first people to have a plumbing system. As you can see there on your brochures, the one on the left is probably a public bathroom, which they would go into. The one on the right, top right, would be more like a Turkish bath. And the bottom two are some of the sanitary sewer systems. The one on the left, I believe, is over in England, and the one in the right is the Romans. I can't date that for you, but it looks like they have a trough there, which they can kind of help things get things moving down to a river, which would then get rid of it. Up to the future, so we've come a long way since the Romans to the present time. Who's to say what the future will bring? We have faucets that you can only touch. We have some toilets now here that you can just wave your hand over and they will flush. So we've come a long way since the Romans. But the plumbers do protect the health of the nation through sanitary and potable, clean drinking water. Some of the things that we do, our primary concern is in our division is the safety aspects of the plumbing system. This covers a wide range of items from proper venting of each fixture to the proper drainage of the whole plumbing system in every building, house, and dwelling. We inspect the smallest of jobs. That could be just changing out a tub to a showers, to adding a lawn sprinkler to your property, to large projects, hospitals, schools, even the Premier Center, large apartment complexes. We check for the proper size of the pipes and the drainage grade on them. If it doesn't have proper grade, it's not going to work. If you have too much grade, it's going to plug, which it's hard to believe, but it will. We check for the support of all the pipes. From water lines have to be hung, braced, strapped, nailed, so they do not sag, bang, things like that. We check for proper stud guards when pipes go through walls, through the studs, to make sure that they cannot get hit by nails or screws. Otherwise, they'll start leaking. And that would be a cost. So we check for the proper backflow on all houses and businesses. And this is, we started this back in the 70s, I believe the city did. And the reason for this backflow is to protect our city water supply. Without that, if you have a negative or break in the main, it could actually suck water back from out of your house, back out into the main. So with this device, that will not happen. We also go on survey calls. If a homeowner or contractor has questions and they aren't able to really explain it to us very well over the phone, we'll go out there and meet them and look at the situation that they're in and come up with the proper answers for them. In addition, we also consult with constructioneers, draftsmen, contractors, if they got a question on interpretation of the code on what it actually means. So we help out with that. In 2016, the plumbing division did 10,276 inspections, which is 40 to 50 inspections a day, which breaks down now to about 11.5 inspections per inspector. In 17, from January to October, we did 8,800, which breaks down, if I keep doing the math, that's 10,800 for the year, which is around 12 inspections per inspector. Next we have, I'm just showing you some new installations of a water heater on the left there and groundwork on a house. The pipe coming through the wall is on a dwelling where the sewer out in the main is not low enough, so they have to come in through the sidewall of the foundation. You'll see the drainage from that toilet and stuff going back to a pit that is called a lift station pit. So they'll have a float in there with a pump. Once it gets so full, it'll pump it up and then back into the drainage pipe coming through the foundation. On replacement fixtures, I got a water heater there on the left. That is actually that's a marathon water heater, and they're usually 80 to 100 gallons. We check for combustion air on water heaters, mechanical rooms. Especially, we have to do that on gas water heaters. If there's not enough combustion air in that room, the appliances will not run properly. They'll give off more carbon monoxide, and they will also reduce the life of that appliance. Sorry, lost my place. We also inspect tubs on replacements. And for new faucets installed on tubs and showers, even though it's just that, we have to check the temperatures because all new housing, bathrooms, bathtub, showers, they are limited to 120 degrees. And with those new faucets, they have a device inside built into them so that they will do that. On new construction, the maximum temperature, which is controlled by the water heater, is a maximum of 140. And then these devices, so if you have 130 at your water heater, these devices will knock them down below that 120. And this is to prevent scalding for children and elderly. We do not inspect replacements of dishwashers or if you change out a sink or a toilet. However, if you move them, then we do. So if you add another sink or you move the stool from one part of the room to another, then we have to come out and inspect it before it gets covered up. That would then require an inspection. Most of the mornings consists of phone calls with contractors and homeowners, either scheduling inspections or answering questions. We schedule our inspections geographically ordered so as to be as efficient as possible in our daily travels. We leave the office between 8:30 and 9 and return about 4 o'clock to answer emails and phone messages. Some inspections do not take very long, like a new gas line to a fireplace, or they're adding a laundry upstairs on the main floor. They only take a few minutes. Other commercial jobs can take as long as an hour. We do not schedule anything longer than that because due to the amount of inspections we have in a day. On apartment building projects for finals, we may have 2 inspectors there to help out on the job to try to get the job done quicker. Some apartments, each dwelling will have their own water heater, so we'll have to go into each unit and check 1 or 2 bathrooms and their sinks for proper code lines on temperatures. Some projects will have a central mixing valve for the whole building, which we generally check each floor anyway, just to make sure. Some of the larger projects, we've had anywhere from 40 to 50 inspections. That's what I had out there on that North Marion complex out there. There was 122 units. So some of these projects are quite time consuming. So at this time, I want to thank you for your time and would be happy to take any questions or comments. I do have one other thing. We were going through our archives because we're going to be moving, and we come across this paper. And this was the first plumbing ordinance that the city of Sioux Falls had. They had 11 contractors which drew this up and took it to council, and this was done November 17th, 1911. So we'll kind of keep that. So we've had quite a long ordinance for plumbing in Sioux Falls. So, pardon? It says, Honorable Mayor and Commissioners, the City of Sioux Falls. Gentlemen, we believe it is in our best interest of the citizens of Sioux Falls that its plumbing be put in standards and sanitary lines similar to that of other cities of its class. A committee of practical master plumbers has spent considerable time in examining various ordinances of other cities and beg to submit to your honorable body and ask that the adoption and passage of the attached plumbing ordinance. So that's pretty much what it, so it's kind of cool. So,
Thank you, Mark.
yep.
Any questions for
questions? Yes.
Councilor Selberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mark, for the presentation. Between the 4 of you covering the whole city, do you get stretched a little thin? Are you going to be adding to the crew anytime soon, or you got plenty of help?
We're doing fairly well. We're doing a lot better in mechanical. So they've only got 3 inspectors, and they do just as many as we do. So when they do have somebody sick or on vacation, they're stretched to 2. So they only got 1 for each half of the city, which is usually split down Minnesota Avenue. So
Good for now, huh? Okay, thank you.
Councilor Neitzer?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions, but Mark, I will say I'm pretty sure you were the one that just about failed me a year or 2 ago when I got a new water heater for not having enough combustion air, but I just eked by your calculations, but it was really close. So 2 questions. Can a homeowner self-perform, number 1, and number 2, if I hire somebody, do they have to be licensed?
the first one is, yes, you can do the work, but you have to get a homeowner's plumbing permit and then have inspections done. Second one is if you hire it done, it has to be by a plumbing contractor licensed with the city of Sioux Falls. You can't have a friend. You can't have a contractor from out of city come in and do it. It has to be somebody from the city of Sioux Falls.
So that's the same or similar to electrical, it sounds like?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Counselor?
I have two questions, and I think maybe one of them is going to be for Mark Cotter. But the first one is, what fee is involved with an inspection? Are there any fees for the homeowner?
Yes. The homeowner is charged for 2 inspections for plumbing. They're charged for a rough-in, and they are charged for a final, plus the cost of the permit.
And how much is that?
That would be $58.
Total?
It's $20 for the permit and $19 for each trip.
So you said $58 total?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next thing I wanted to ask was just an update, since you brought it up, on that backflow preventer. Maybe Mark Cotter can tell us, because you mentioned that's something that you're doing, and I know that came up several months ago concerning fitting apartments with that and commercial buildings and then homeowners, and then can you tell us where we're at with that conversation, Mr. Cotter?
Certainly, and Mark and his team, Justin, is actually on that committee. So we took a step back. We've got a broader group of property owners that we've had 2 meetings. We did have to cancel this last one because we needed more time to research what some other cities did to identify their highest hazards, like a funeral parlor, for example, all the way down to maybe the lowest hazard. So we're wanting to get some more case studies on that. But essentially, we've got a group that's about 20 people that's meeting in generally about monthly, and we're talking through the different challenges and opportunities that come with backflow prevention. Mark is absolutely right. It's one of the key aspects of protecting the drinking water system, but kind of taking a step back and working with property owners has really given us a sense, and we've also gone out and seen several of them. So we've gone out and seen several 4-plexes and 8-plexes that were maybe built 50 years ago, and the size of the mechanical rooms and the clearances are completely different than what they are today. So it really gave us some firsthand knowledge of some of the challenges that they will face with some of the backflow prevention devices. But essentially, we've taken a step back. We've got a good broad group, and I would expect it's still going to take several months before I would bring back recommendations to this body.
So several months, meaning 6 months?
I think that's a fair statement. Probably somewhere on the short side is 4 and the long side is 6.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Mark? Mark, thank you very much, and your team, thank you very much for what you do. And I do know that the fee that you pay for the inspections pays for itself many times over, because if you install something improperly and then you have to come in after the fact and tear it out, especially after you've done finish work, it's going to far exceed $58.
Well, and we run into a lot of people that do not get inspections, and they generally end up getting caught, and then it really costs, because in order for somebody to buy their existing home, we have to go in there and they have to cut holes and stuff so we can see what they had done previously before covering it all up.
Right.
So it can be kind of costly. So
Well, when we turn on the tap, we expect it to flow in, and when we flush our toilets, we expect it to flow out. So thank you very much for your efforts in making that happen. I think they're both equally important.
all right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, our second presentation this afternoon is East River Veterans Cemetery, and Mr. Terry Polson with the Paralyzed Veterans of America North Central Chapter will present, and I'll allow Terry to introduce his colleagues too. So welcome, Terry.
Thank you, Chairman Kiley, council members. With me today, as the chairman said, my name is Terry Paulson. I'm president of the South Dakota Veterans Council. The council consists of 6 chartered organizations across the state representing 72,000 veterans. The Paralyzed Veterans of America, the Disabled American Veterans, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, the Vietnam Veterans of America, the American Legion, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars. With me today, I have my vice chair, Ken Tunison, with the Military Order of the Purple Heart, and Rick Williamson, the commander in the VFW. Us 3 also were appointed by the Lieutenant Governor when we started this project about a year and a half ago as part of a task force to see what we could do to make sure that we could get a state veteran cemetery built. I know my time is limited here, so I will try to be brief. There's more slides in here that I'm going to talk about, but I'd be glad to discuss them offline if you would like. But like I said, I'm here on behalf of the South Dakota Veterans Council. I'm here to ask for your support in helping build a state veteran cemetery on the east side of South Dakota. How did we come to this conclusion that we needed a cemetery? South Dakota is one of 5 states that does not have a state veteran cemetery in the nation. We have over 42,000 unserved veterans living within a 75-mile radius of Sioux Falls, and where that comes into play is a federal grant is offered if you have a certain amount of veterans populations and you do not have a cemetery for those veterans to be buried in, whether it be a national or a state veteran cemetery. Sioux Falls qualifies for that radius, and that will pull some veterans from Minnesota, Iowa. If you put a pinprick in the middle of Sioux Falls, a 75-mile radius would encompass those 42,000 veterans, and we're excited about that. Our closest veteran cemetery right now is our National Cemetery out in Sturgis, or the National Cemetery at Fort Snelling in Minnesota. Of the 72,000 veterans that I mentioned in South Dakota, 50,000 of those reside East River. VA's expenditure to South Dakota based on veterans' dollars for FY 2014 was over $619 million that were brought in either through comp and pen for the veterans or the VA medical health care or anything associated with veterans' pay. Veterans are eligible for free burial benefits, but rarely use them due to the distance to be buried. South Dakota Department of Veterans Affairs, and this is kind of what our priority list to make this happen. We need the South Dakota Department of Veterans Affairs to submit a pre-application prior to July of 2018. We're in discussions with them. Last week we were in Pierre talking to legislators. We feel that we have very great momentum going forward with this. The Veterans Council and legislators have prepared a legislative bill to provide for the design, the construction, and equipping of a state veteran cemetery in Sioux Falls, and to make an appropriation therefore and to declare an emergency. South Dakota Veterans Council working to establish a special operating fund to help offset any annual operating costs that may exceed the cost of operating the state veteran cemetery. This has been the main concern of a veteran cemetery. The South Dakota Veterans Council has pursued this for over 20 years. And every year somebody says it costs too much. This year we came to them and said the veterans will pay for it. We just need to find the land, the location, and the federal government will come in and they'll build us a $6 million facility to look like Arlington National Cemetery. We're hoping to have that in Sioux Falls either in 2019 or 2020. We're working with the local and state authorities to procure or acquire land. We're looking at 40 to 50 acres. Sioux Falls, like I said, meets the federal grant requirements for the veteran population to be eligible for that grant, and they are very excited to work with us. I believe one of them had mentioned to us that if we were on the list last year, we'd have one started already. So we are very excited about that. If we were to acquire the land, Sioux Falls would not be accountable for any costs associated with maintaining, equipping, or constructing the state veteran cemetery. The federal government will come in and pay for it and then turn the keys over to the state of South Dakota to maintain it. That's where we are expecting that each veteran is eligible for a burial fee of $749 for every burial. And the federal government is expecting roughly about 276 burials each year to be buried in that cemetery, which would by far cover the costs of maintaining that cemetery. National Cemetery Administration publishes a new priority list each year for states submitting applications to the cemetery grant. That again goes back to that pre-application prior to 1 July. That list typically comes out in September of that same year. We are hoping to be number one on that list. I'm going to skip ahead here. The economic impact to the city of Sioux Falls. Currently, the federal government has put numbers together, and it's in your packet, to come in and build a $6 million cemetery, and it will look exactly like Arlington National Cemetery. We are looking at roughly $130,000 of annual operating costs, and that's basically, we're looking at 2 full-time employees, and then obviously the operating costs of water and electricity and so on. $206,000 annual incoming burial allocations. That's the $749 burial allocation each veteran is afforded to be buried in that cemetery. And based on 276 burials, we would take in a estimated $206,000 to help offset those costs. There again, the $15,000 we're banking on annual cemetery maintenance costs, and another $33,000 for equipment repair and ongoing operating costs. All of which the full-time employees obviously would reside here, and then the question marks there are the annual motel fuel, food costs associated with family members coming in for the funerals and so on. Sioux Falls is looking at a sizable impact if and when this is constructed. Some facts that we try to outline: the cemetery must have a 20-year span at a minimum. That's going to that 40 to 50 acres that we're talking about. The state must have written approval from the VA for the final work drawings. The cemetery must be operated solely for the interment of service members who die on active duty, veterans, and their spouses and or minor dependent children. That's who is eligible to be buried in these cemeteries. Veteran Service Organization should be informed of the project, which we are, and fully support this. The state legislation must pass necessary legislation authorizing the state to appropriate funds for the establishment and operation. Once again, we are working on a bill. I've seen the draft. It was sent to me yesterday. We're working on some language of that. Some of the stuff that needs to be in that is the acceptance of land, the cost of the 10% upfront design fee, which ends up coming back fully refundable back to the state once the project is completed. So we're working through those details now. As I said before, the VA is authorized to pay a plot allowance of $749 to the state for expenses incurred in the burial of an eligible veteran without charge. And the Veteran Cemetery Grants Program assists state governments in providing grave sites in those areas where the National Cemetery Administration cannot fully satisfy veterans' burial needs, which is one of 5 is Sioux Falls, and that is the veteran service organizations that I mentioned earlier are pushing to make sure that we're not on that list again next year. Here again, this is what is provided, gravesite or columbarium niche. You guys can see on the slide there, what is the cost to the veteran? Nothing. That veteran has earned the right to be buried in a national or state veteran cemetery, of which when they are buried there, that $749 or $750 is then paid back to the state to help the offset of operating costs. Their spouse and eligible dependents can be buried there, of which they would be charged the same $750, and that would be covered by the family of that estate. Military funeral honors obviously are coordinated by the cemetery. Honors include the playing of taps, folding of the flag, and its presentation to the next of kin. That concludes my PowerPoint, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for allowing me to talk on this issue today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Terry. Questions for Terry? Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I think this is a really exciting time for our city and our state to be able to partner together for an opportunity such as this. When I was in the legislature 6 years ago, this was a hot topic, and we talked about this as well, and it seems to come up every single year. And I'm thankful for folks like you that don't give up and that keep trying to work through the numbers, keep trying to find ways to make this work. There's a lot of ways to get things done. And so with your diligence as well as other leadership, I know Rex Rolfing and Rick Kiley have been involved in this as well. Thank you for that. My question is what next? What do you need from us? What can we do to support you?
That's a great question. Like I say, we're in discussions with legislators out in Pierre right now. Obviously, we will not be able to get this done without their support. This will have to pass legislation. We are looking at acquiring land. That is the big thing.
Do you have land? Do you have land? Is there land in Sioux Falls that Sioux Falls is able to partner with you at this time?
We have had some meetings.
Can I take that?
Absolutely, Councilor
As I've been working, we have identified some land that would be potential. I can identify it as in the Slip-Up Creek, the old Slip-Up Creek area.
Yep.
Which is some land that we've been holding on to that doesn't serve the purpose that it was originally purchased for. We sent a letter to the legislature last week indicating that we are willing to work with them on gift sale, some way of getting this done for a cemetery. It's a beautiful piece of land that would be very appropriate for a cemetery. And so that's where we're at with it. And next step for us is that I will be bringing, Chairman Kiley and I will be bringing a resolution indicating our willingness to work and provide land under certain circumstances for this purpose. And that'll be done in February so that the people up in Pierre will know that we are serious about it and that they can then go ahead with, it's kind of those egg, chicken, egg, chicken, egg, chicken. Finally you get whatever, you get an omelet or whatever. And we end up with, we got to do it as much as we can, and we're trying to do it as quickly as we can, but also knowing that we got to make sure that we dot all our I's and cross all our T's. This has been going on, I think, Terry, you told me, for about 20 years. We've been working on this. And so we've got it now to where the $600,000 that is the that the South Dakota legislature has to appropriate will be returned to them when the cemetery is built. So it's no cost there. And the operation of the cemetery itself will be basically no cost either to the state. So it's kind of we've got to get kind of moving on this, see if we can get it through so we can get it done in 2018.
Thank you. Thank you. And before the meeting started, I received a few text messages from a few legislative friends saying, thank you for hearing this presentation. We're moving things along. There's some support there. So that was really exciting to know that they're paying attention to what we are also doing here at the local level, as well as us watching what they're doing, and it really has to coincide for the timeline of what you are looking for, that neither one of us wants to hold up each other, and so it's important for us to kind of ride the bicycle next to each other as we move this along, provided there's support from everyone. Thank you for your vision for this. This is about our country and about those that serve our country, and it's a lot of folks don't maybe use the benefits, as you said. It's just not as convenient, and so having that is really a huge priority in our community, I think. So thank you for being here. I have a few more questions, but I'll wait for now.
Councilor Selbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for being here. Thanks to you and Ken and Rick for being here. Maybe you mentioned it. What am I missing? What has been the big roadblock here?
Well, the big roadblock has always been the funding. The operating costs, and when the federal government comes out, they do a cost analysis, obviously, and they say, here's how many acres we need to build your cemetery. Here's how many federal employees you should have. Now, this is based on big big cemeteries that we're not going to have. I think their numbers came back with 5 full-time employees. Well, we don't need 5 full-time employees because we don't even have a cemetery yet. And we're basing the fact that we can do it with 2 full-time employees, possibly some part-time groundskeeping. And when you can reduce the cost based on the amount of burials that will be paid for by the federal government, we now have shown that there will be a surplus rather than us owing money each year. And that's always been the sticking point. The land has always been a sticking point. I don't know that anybody's ever approached Sioux Falls and said, we need some land. I don't know that that's ever been happened before. But we did it this year, and we've been in great conversations and great talks, and we hope something can get done. Of course, we never take anything for granted, but we're just trying to showcase what we know to be fact, and we know the federal government is willing and almost begging us to put one here, and we want to do that. I think our veterans have certainly earned that right, and if their own benefit can pay for the operating costs, then our biggest sticking point is acquiring the land. And if we have the land and we can show that the costs are being paid for by those benefits, it should be a no-brainer. But there's always those questions, and we're trying to get over them and push this as we think we're finally there.
Yeah, it sounds like you're getting there, and that was kind of what I'm thinking when you look at it. It seems like a no-brainer, and I'm certainly full behind it. I can't imagine why we wouldn't be with what you're saying here, but that's what I was trying to see what I was missing, so thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. And thank you all for your service. I appreciate what you've done for our country and in your roles in the military, as well as what you're doing for us now. As the child of 2 military veterans, I am well-versed in Black Hills National Cemetery. That's the area that I grew up in, and I have a sibling buried there. Can you talk to us about the difference between a national cemetery like that and what it means when we say a state veteran cemetery like this?
Yes, ma'am, and that's a great question. National cemeteries are fully funded by the federal government. There's no cost to the state whatsoever. It is paid by the federal government, maintained by the federal government. Same benefits apply as a state veteran cemetery. The only difference with the state veteran cemetery is the federal government will come in and build it. And they're going to put their buildings down, and they're going to put their maintenance buildings, and it's going to look like Arlington National Cemetery. And when it's completed, they turn the keys over to the state. And they say, now it's your responsibility to maintain it. And that's always back to the question over here, is that the maintenance costs have always scared people because the ongoing appropriated funds. And we are trying to show that the funds will be paid by the veterans' benefits themselves. And some may say, well, what if? And, you know, we're just showing the facts. And so the difference is the state has to maintain it versus on the federal side, they maintain it at no cost to the state, whereas the state is responsible for maintaining the cemetery.
But the numbers add up so that the benefit of the burial actually covers those costs.
Well, it does, based upon how many full-time employees you want working there and how extravagant of groundskeeping, you know what I'm saying? We're showing full-time employees of 2 people actually administering the work at the cemetery, and possibly we even talked, maybe even the Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs being the director of it, and he's already on the payroll. We're just trying to come up with solutions to make it show that it can be done that way. Because in the past, it's always been the dollars.
Right. So to put it in context, Councilor Rolfing kind of alluded to it. The Slip Up Creek area is city-owned land, and it is located north of I-90 and sort of east of where 29 hits, or 229 hits 90 over on the northeast side of town. So when you talk about this design looking exactly like Arlington Cemetery, again, my only reference, I mean, I've been to other national cemeteries, but I have a clear reference in the Black Hills National Cemetery. It's a very simple design. The buildings are low level, 1-story brick. When you talk about your concept for design, can you talk about what that means? Because Arlington is marble and balustrades and all kinds of very fancy design. Can you talk to that? How do you perceive that being?
Yes, ma'am. When I say Arlington, I always use that as a guidepost as the vision of what it would look like. Yes, it will be marble headstones, and it will look very similar to either Sturgis or Arlington, and that's part of the design work. They're going to look at the ground available. They're going to look at, is it rolling hills? Is it flat terrain? Is it what buildings are necessary to fit in with the design of the land and the city and all that stuff. And that's part of that 10% design fee that we are asking for appropriations from the state, because then we go ahead and do the design work. And then once that's completed, the federal government will give us back that $600,000. And that 10%, that $600,000 is based on a $6 million project. So that's where that number comes from.
Sure. And I apologize, I went immediately to the architecture of the buildings, and you went to the design of the burial grounds. And so that makes it very clear for me. I appreciate it. Thank you for answering my questions.
Councilor Staley.
Terry, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I did want to say, you may have followed months ago when our city had some land that we have given, leased, whatever, to the Glory House. So this isn't something that hasn't been done before. I didn't know about this project until a few weeks ago, and I had a chance to visit with one of the people a legislator who's leading this, and I just want to say to you and to the community that I'm going to be taking some action to alert the citizens about this. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think having community support on board is going to be huge, and maybe encouraging people to contact the legislature and say this is something that we want, because location, I know, is a hardship for some of these veterans' families. So bravo. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Well,
If I could add just one last thing, and I just want to mention this. I've talked to many other states that do have state veteran cemetery. Just so happens our neighbor to the east of us, Minnesota, has 2. And they are a much larger state, I get that. They are in the process right now of trying to get a 3rd. And that's going to be somewhere east of Brookings, somewhere. And if they do get that, we possibly will run out of the requirements needed, because they're going to suck some of our population over that way, and we are hoping that does not happen.
Okay, Terry, thank you. And early on in your presentation, the comment, veterans are eligible for free burial benefits, but rarely use them due to distance. And that's a sad state of affairs. I mean, we've got individuals, men and women, who have, in some cases, paid the ultimate price to their country. And my father could have certainly have taken use of this, benefited from this, as well as my mother as a spouse. And even my sister, who passed away at age 18, would have been considered a dependent due to special needs that she dealt with. And my father actually passed away from circumstances associated with his time in the service. So this would have been a great opportunity for the 3 of them. And so I wish you the best of luck, and I'm very thankful that you had approached Councilor Rolfing and myself earlier, and we've had several discussions with this, and it's time to bring in the rest of the council, and hopefully you can generate the support at the state level too. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Okay, our next topic of discussion is one that's really been kind of on the agenda, or at least it's we planned for this for quite some time now, and it's the Denny Sanford Premier Center building enclosure report. And I'm going to introduce Director of Public Works, Mark Cotter, who can then introduce our main presenter for this topic. Welcome, Director Cotter.
Thank you, Council Chair and Council members. We're pleased to come before you today. We have a lot of information to share, but just a few words to first introduce the consultant team and then ultimately Peter. With your leadership and partnership, we sought an independent review of the Denny Sanford Premier Center flush metal panel for functionality and structural soundness. In addition, we also asked the consultant to review the air and moisture barrier system that ultimately protects the building that sits behind the metal panel. We're pleased with the findings. The metal panel system on the Denny Sanford Premier Center is functionally and structurally sound, and the commercial tie-vac system that is doing what it's intended to do by being the air and moisture barrier. To take a step back to make the selection of SGH, to select the building enclosure firm, this is the first time we've hired a specialty firm to do an independent study. We've had one on the design team when we constructed the Denny Sanford Premier Center, but the first time we actually went out for an RFP for a building enclosure firm, and when we did so, we had 4 strong proposals. The leading firm hired to do the work was Simpson, Gumpertz, and Heger. We'll refer to them a lot tonight as SGH. Councilor Neitzer and Councilor Erpenbach were on the selection committee, and we appreciate your energy and time. Every one of these selections takes a lot of reading and a lot of thought before you ultimately make that hire. Here to present the report today from SGH is Peter Babayan. He's a registered professional engineer and a registered structural engineer. Peter is the Building Technology Division head for the Chicago office of SGH and leads the building enclosure commissioning practice at SGH. He has extensive experience in designing, investigating, and rehabilitating a variety of building enclosures and structures. Peter has several slides to present to you today, and if possible, we had that if you allow him to get through all of his slides, some of your questions may be answered as we get through that. So if you could hold your questions to the end, that would be appreciated. And so now please help me welcome Peter Babayan to the microphone. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Babayan.
Thank you very much, councilors. I appreciate your time this afternoon, and I look forward to answering your questions regarding our work on this project. I'm going to just give a brief outline as what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to our firm. I realize 2 of you might be familiar with us from the selection process. I'm sure the others are not. I'm going to do a brief discussion on the basics of exterior wall systems, and then I will talk about our work on the assessment, our conclusions, and recommendations. Simpson, Gumpertz, and Hager was founded by 3 professors, Howard Simpson, Werner Gumpertz, and Frank Hager from MIT in 1956, who believed that they could do more together as independent consultants than they could in their professional practice in advancing knowledge of buildings and building systems. From the office in Cambridge, we've since grown the company to our current 7 offices across the country as a national engineering firm. Our work encompasses structural engineering, building enclosure engineering, and material science. Included in our submission on the RFP was several projects where we've done work in the past on metal panel systems, and I'm showing 3 of them here where we have designed metal panel systems, investigated the failures of metal panel systems, and done rehabilitation on metal panel systems. With that, I want to jump into some exterior wall system basics. We ask our exterior wall systems to do a significant amount of work on a building, so it's important that they are designed properly and installed properly. But from a basic standpoint, there is 4 barriers that the exterior wall system encompasses. The first is waterproofing. We call that our barrier 1, and that is to prevent rainwater or groundwater, if it's below grade, from entering the structure. The remaining three barriers, insulation, vapor retarder, and air barrier, control condensation potential within the wall system and control the energy consumption of the building. There are two basic wall systems out there. The first is a barrier wall system, which you can see on the left. Essentially, in a barrier wall system, the exterior plane of the wall is your barrier to everything getting into that wall system. Once it's penetrated through the exterior plane, water can move freely through the wall system. In a cavity wall system, which is the other predominant wall system on the market, you have a cladding material that deflects the majority of the water. Incidental water is expected to get through the cladding, enter a cavity where it is collected and drained to the exterior. And you can see that in the illustration here. To give you one that's more based on metal panel and more of a three-dimensional view, you can see there's a metal panel rain screen system which deflects your bulk water. There is a cavity behind it that's created by the horizontal and vertical girts that support the metal panel system that lets the water collect and drain out to the exterior. Then you have the remainder of your system, the insulation, the waterproofing membranes, the vapor retarders, and the air barriers. So let's talk specifically about the Denny Sanford Premier Center and our work there. The objective of our work was to evaluate the functionality and the structural soundness of the IMETCO CF12 metal panels on the northwest and south elevations. Secondary objectives of our assessment was to determine the potential causes of the visible panel buckling and to evaluate the waterproofing and air barrier system that is behind the panels. In our response to the RFP, we explicitly stated we were going to do a non-destructive visual assessment of the panel system. Based on the review of the information provided at the RFP, this seemed the most appropriate way to go about doing this. There would have been no information indicating that anything destructive was required. In addition, a destructive investigation would require opening up the wall system, cutting through the panels unless you are to unzip it. The panels are put on in such a way, which we'll see further on, where they start in one corner and work their way across and down, kind of the reverse of putting siding on a house. And in order to pick random selections throughout the wall system, we would have had to cut open the panels. We would have then had to patch the panels. It would have left a aesthetic that may not have been architecturally satisfying to the city. We began our work with a review of the available design documents, reports, and construction photos that were pertinent to the IMETCO CF12 metal panel system. We conducted a 2-day site visit where we made observations visually from the ground and from low roof areas. We also did a walkthrough of the interior spaces to look for evidence of leakage that may be occurring, particularly at the opaque wall system behind the IMETCO CF12 panel. We also did a hands-on inspection using an aerial lift, and then we completed an analysis of our observations at our office and issued our report. So the metal panel wall system on this building, as designed, you can see it is essentially a rain screen system. It has a metal panel that deflects the bulk water. It has a sheet membrane that is your waterproofing and air barrier behind it, and it has a spray foam insulation that acts as the insulation and the vapor retarder for the wall system. So we see all 4 barriers in the design of the wall system. We take the design and it's used by the contractors to develop shop drawings, where again we see that the design intent is met here, where the metal panels deflect the bulk water. We have a cavity that we did not have in the design introduced here, again, to manage any incidental water that gets behind the metal panel system. It's created by vertical hat channels that you may or may not be able to tell, depending on how familiar you are with reading drawings. But there is essentially a cavity that's created by them. And then we have a waterproofing air barrier shown. Noted on this drawing is vapor barrier, but that is incorrect. That's the insulation, the spray foam insulation is performing that task, which is not shown in this, which is typical because that's not the metal panel person's purview. Here's your as constructed 3-dimensional image and section through it, showing again that you have a metal panel system acting as a cavity wall where it deflects bulk water. The vertical furrings create cavity drainage space. The Tyvek waterproofing performs the ability to collect that water and turn it out at the flashings on the building, also as your air barrier, and then the spray foam insulation being the insulation and vapor retarder. So I wanted to take you through a couple of photos that we received as part of our review of the construction on the building. Here is the Tyvek system on the left and the metal panels system on the right. You can tell that there's two different types of metal panels. The upper metal panels are corrugated, and those are not included in our review. The lower panels are the IMETCO CF12 flat metal panel system. So we had some very good photos showing it go in. This is the zippering effect where they basically start from the left-hand side. They're working their way across and down. Again, to make an opening, you either cut through a metal panel or you would have to unzipper to get to the point where you want to get to. Water management on this building is basically, as I've mentioned before, the metal panels deflect the bulk amount of water. Any incidental moisture that gets through the panels, through joints and whatnot, is collected by in the cavity space by the Tyvek and turned out at flashings that exist at the tops of windows, at the window heads, and at the base of the wall. So here's examples of those flashings on the building. The water management system, again, is the Tyvek weather barrier that is behind the panels and behind the GERT system. We evaluated it using the photographs from construction. This is a very good Tyvek installation. We look for things like flatness of the Tyvek, seaming, wrinkles, and generally speaking, this is a very good installation from our analysis of the photographs. To give you an example of two projects where recently I've done in the last 2 years. These are Tyvek installations in progress. You can see that in these cases, this is what we would call a bad installation. The contractor is not taking the necessary care with the Tyvek system to make sure that it is continuous and will do the job that it needs to do behind the cladding system. Field observations. Quickly, we made interior observations. I'm going to call attention to essentially two locations that is mentioned in the report that do not pertain to the IMETCO CF12 systems, but were areas where we observed past indications of water, and this would be on the aluminum curtain wall system. We see water streaking on interior mullions. Could be from construction, could be from condensation, could be from water leakage. We can't tell. We brought it up as a informational item for the city, so that, because we did observe this. The second one is the opening in the wall of up in the mechanical space, which is actually behind the corrugated metal panel system. We did go up there. We did look at it. It has been termed historical leakage. Nobody has seen leakage associated with this in 3 years. We wanted to see it primarily because it was an opportunity to see wall construction and verify that, even though it's at a different section of the building, that the wall construction is generally per the drawings. From the exterior, you can see the visible change pattern at the longitudinal panel-to-panel joints going around the building. I believe this is what caused necessitated the need for the assessment. You can see how those end joints are lapped together here. One piece of panel is essentially folded and inserted behind the adjacent panel. The joints are tight. We did try to measure them. We did try to put through essentially what was a credit card type item. So you're looking at something on the order of maybe about 10 or so sheets of paper in thickness that we're trying to put through there, which is about 0.04 inches. So not very thick, but panels are tight together. We did observe staining coming from primarily the reveals, and this was hit or miss throughout the elevations. We did some qualitative testing on the metal panel structural integrity. We had some suction cups, and we were, attempting our best to pull the panels essentially off, see how much we could deflect the panels. This is the worst one that we could do. We could open the panel slightly here. That's about 1/4 of an inch that we're able to deflect the panel. It then returned to its previous position. We did note some loose trim pieces that existed on the building, primarily at window jambs and a little bit at window heads with the trim, rivets that were either not fully installed or pieces of trim that were not fully anchored in place. We did do a structural analysis on the panels to confirm that they are attached to the building in a manner that will not that we are not concerned about them pulling off. We looked at pull out of the fasteners and pull over of the metal through the fastener, essentially, where the fastener stays in place and the metal pulls over around it. We based everything off of the fasteners that Dawson provided to the city recently as essentially attic stock attic stock material for the center. We looked at the different spacings that were available on the support structure behind the panels, and what we did is we calculated what the actual capacity is and compared it to the actual forces that are on it, and we develop a factor of safety. In other words, how much extra capacity do we have over the demand that the panels are under. A factor of safety of 1 means the capacity and the demand are equal. A factor of safety of 2 means you have twice as much capacity as the demand. The industry standard is to have a factor of safety of 3 for these panels. You can see that the factor of safety that we calculated is above 3 in all cases. We did an analysis on thermal expansion. The specifications required that the panels accommodate thermal expansion for an 180-degree temperature swing. We did our calculations to determine what the amount of movement would be expected and whether or not the end joints of the panels could accommodate it or whether or not they would contribute potentially to the buckling of the panels. We found that in the very worst case, a full 180-degree swing, the panel would be overstressed by approximately 13%. That is not a point of necessarily a failure, but that the amount of deflection that it is holding up is approximately 0.04 inches, again, about the thickness of a credit card or 10 sheets of paper. And what happens is that inability to deflect at the end joints creates stresses, which then can lead to the buckling that we see on the panels themselves. In addition, the way that these panels were formed on the building also creates the potential for a weak point where the buckling can then take place due to the expansion. These are panels that went on as a flat panel system and were curved in place by fastening them to the support structure underneath rather than being pre-curved. And as you can see from this illustration, we took a panel joint where you would have a 6-inch extension of the panel past one support on one side and a 1.5-foot extension of the panel on from the support on the other side at the 2-foot support locations. And essentially, they're trying to bend those together so that they could nest one panel inside the other to make that end joint. As a result, as you can imagine, that creates a slight weak point where you can then have the stresses from the thermal expansion result in the buckle that we see on the building. Here it is illustrated. You can see it's just going to be slightly out of plane as a result with the panels above and below, which are more center of panel curvature. And you can see that's approximately 7/64 of an inch by our calculation on the worst case scenario. And here you can see that in the actual photos that we see. So conclusions and recommendations, these come straight from our report. The metal cladding is generally installed according to the construction documents in the shop drawings. However, they do not design a joint on the end panel joint that could accommodate the thermal movement that was specified. They generally appear to be fastened per the shop drawings, and the fastening pattern used and the fasteners that Dawson says were used and provided to the city as attic stock are sufficient to resist all applied wind loads. There's no reports of leakage into the building. Water and air leakage do not appear to be occurring through the building enclosure at the IMECO panel locations and the opaque wall systems. We do recommend that the window system need to be monitored to confirm that the stains that we observed are not active leakage. The visual appearance of the warping, buckling, or bulging at the joints is most likely due to the lapping of the flat panels around the curved building. The tight transverse and longitudinal joints between the panels contribute to the appearance of buckling due to the thermal expansion. And to avoid this appearance, the panels would need to have been pre-curved. We recommend the following: that the loose trim components be secured to the building, and that they either be set in sealant or mechanically attached with rivets and screws. We did not identify every piece of loose trim on the building, so that should be done as part of the work that is when they go back to reattach these. We recommend that the panels be inspected every 10 years to confirm that the thermal cycling has not resulted in cracks forming in the panels, particularly at the buckled locations. We recommend that you monitor the windows during rain events to determine if the stains that we observed are related to ongoing water leakage at the windows or if they are from construction or condensation or some other cause. And we recommend that the residue, which is a butyl residue on the surface of the metal panels, be cleaned as described by a correspondence from IMECO that was provided during the project timeframe, and that we monitor it for reoccurrence. With that, I know I've presented a lot of information. I'm open to take questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Peter. We'll now open it up. Councillor Neitzer.
Thank you, Peter. First, I want to say thanks a lot for coming. Your resume and your experience speaks for itself, and this is something that's been a big deal for our city, so it's nice to get the independent verification. I have a number of questions, so I'll just do one little stream of thought, and then I'll defer, and we can just kind of go back and forth. So I think you've addressed, one of the misconceptions I think out there was that no water should get behind the panels, and that obviously that is not the way it's designed. It's to keep bulk water out. So when there's a gap and water gets behind the panel, there's a space between a metal panel and then the actual substrate, the wall created by those hat channels or the J channels. So what does the water do? Does it go down a channel and then?
Yeah, so the water that gets beyond the metal panels, and it should be what we would term incidental water. So the bulk of the water should be deflected by the metal panels. Anything that does get past it, there is a gap there. It is the depth of the hat channel. I don't recall off the top of my head if that's a 1 inch or a 1.5 inch gap. Water then is in that gap, whether it's at the hat channel specifically or at an air cavity that the hat channel creates because they're spaced every couple of feet. Water then travels down. If it makes it far enough back, it travels down the face of the Tyvek. Otherwise, it drips on the backside of the panels down to the base of either the wall system, where there's a flashing, which is a horizontal member that turns that water out to the exterior, or at a window head, where again there's a flashing at the window head to prevent that water from entering the building at that location.
Okay, very good. And then you did get a look at least in pictures of the Tyvek?
Yes, in the pictures.
What was your general impression, at least based on pictures of how well it is installed or if it might be doing its job?
Yeah, based on the pictures that were provided to us from the construction time frame, the Tyvek is installed very well, and it would be something that I would expect would be functioning the way it should be, which is to prevent water from passing through and to prevent air from passing through the wall system.
And then finally for this round, what is that blue board that we see in the pictures? Is that a sheetrock or what is that?
Yeah, that's an exterior sheathing. So it goes on the wall system. So you have a smooth surface for your Tyvek to be installed on. And the reason it's blue is I believe this one is a water resistant exterior sheathing. Most of them are green, but the blue ones typically indicate that they are able to withstand water themselves.
So it would be like metal stud, blue board, Tyvek, hat channel gap metal,
That's correct.
essentially?
That's correct,
Metal
yes.
panels, okay, thanks.
Okay, very good. Questions? Councillor Staley.
And again, I have a few different things I wanted to go to. Would this evaluation have been affected at all had you done it in the middle of the summer with maybe 90-degree, 100-degree heat?
From the standpoint of what we did, no. We may have been able to cover a little bit more of the building, just given that it was extremely windy when we were here, and we were able to get as much as we could. But from our procedures, no, it would not. From the metal panel standpoint, the metal panels would have been fully expanded at that point.
And I will tell you, having visited with a lot of people, there was a consensus among my contacts that people did want something removed. They did want to look beyond the surface. And you call it a destructive visual, you said non-destructive, and then this would be a destructive one?
That's correct.
So that could have been done?
Yes, destructive could have been done. It would have cost more time, taken more money, and it would have required panels to go back into place, and it would likely not have resulted in an aesthetic of the existing panel system. It would have been panels that are fastened back and possibly exposed fasteners. You may not have quite the same appearance on the face of the metal panel itself. But it is possible to do a destructive evaluation.
And you can't get to this, like taking something from the inside off and going in that way?
Well, the problem with going from the inside is that everything you want to see is actually on the exterior side of the steel studs and that blue board that the counselor had mentioned previously. So if you want to see that, you have to go in from the exterior. If you go from the interior and make a hole, you're not able to then adequately seal it up, and you've actually potentially introduced a location where you could have water leakage then coming into the building at a later date. When
you go out to a community and they have you looking at a situation that the material isn't acting the way it should be, how often have you run into a community where they have a warranty that they fall back on, that they would be using you as the investigative tool as to that there would be something wrong? So that, you would find something out and then they're able to go back to someone and say, this needs to be fixed. How does that happen occasionally?
It does.
And so you are being used as that investigational tool for a warranty situation.
Our firm does do investigations, whether it's something that is warranted or not warranted.
And then one more thing right now. Tell us, what is a draft report?
It is essentially what it sounds like, an initial writing of our report that has the information that is going to be conveyed and is not yet ready for final distribution.
What makes it not ready for final distribution?
Typically, it has not been fully vetted internally, or the analysis may not be fully done. It may be done preliminarily enough to understand where the conclusions will be coming from, but maybe not all the calculations are complete at the time it goes out.
Thank you.
Councillor Erpenbach.
Thank you, and thanks for being here. I appreciate, I know you.
You're welcome.
You may or may not know that you're really under the gun tonight, so we just appreciate you being brave and coming and visiting with us. A couple of things, just from my standpoint. And I had grown to understand that the metal panels really are as much aesthetic as anything, and you said that they're really almost like a splash guard. They're going to keep most of the water out, but some of it's going to get in. Then the piece that's holding the water really from getting inside the building is that product called Tyvek, and we see it wrapped on houses that are under construction and that kind of thing. Do you know what the life expectancy is of the Tyvek product?
Yeah, I would say a Tyvek product should last at least 30 years in a protected environment like that, where it's already installed in a good manner and is not seeing weather where it's not exposed.
So in 30 years, we can expect that stuff is going to start to break up possibly, and we may need to be dealing with that anyway at that time. Is that correct?
Possibly, yes.
Then my other question has to do with one of your final conclusions. Actually the last one, and I don't know what butyl means. So butyl, the butyl residue from the surface of the metal panels. Is that what's pictured? Looks like dripping on the field observation, staining at the reveals in that slide?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
So that can actually just be cleaned up, but you don't know for sure where that came from, or
Well,
do we know?
It comes from the panel manufacturing and installation, and it's something that if it's not fully cleaned and there's some residue that starts to drip down, what it does is it collects dirt. And what you're seeing is the dirt that's sticking to it, and that's what causes it to actually look discolored like that.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. I do, Mr. Chair, have questions for Mr. Cotter, but I'll wait until the group kind of moves in that direction. Thank you.
Councilor Rolfe?
Councilor Urbanbach's question was one of mine, and I thank you for the answer. Basically, some oil that's kind of gotten down in there and dirt's collected on it.
Essentially, yes.
Because you get oil and aluminum, and it kind of, it collects on it. Okay. The water or whatever that was, the opening in the wall located in historic leakage. Can you explain a little bit more about what historic leakage is, or?
Sure. We called it historic leakage because it occurred, I believe, 2 years ago and has not reoccurred. It was something that the operator wanted to bring us to as part of our interior walkthrough, despite it being outside of the scope of the IMECO CF12 location. And we decided it would be worthwhile to see because we could see, since they said they left the wall open, we could see and make sure that it was constructed per the drawing. So we had some more confidence in how the contractor actually constructed everything.
So in other words, this is an area that something happened there one time just after the building was open, and we don't know what it was, but it's never reoccurred, so it's probably not coming from outside. It probably came from the inside.
That's essentially,
yeah.
We don't know why it happened, and I don't know what they did to solve it.
Okay.
The opening remains.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Selberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I too had a quick question on the staining part, which has been popular so far. Did you see a lot of that as you went around the building?
There's a fair amount of it. We didn't quantify it, but there is probably, most reveals have it. Some have it heavier than others.
How far away from the building did you have to be before you could notice it? Any idea?
I don't recall.
And if you clean it, like you go take your recommendation and clean it, how soon will you have to clean it again?
I don't know how much of it there is, but if you clean it, you would remove what's there, and if there's anything left, it would also then potentially come out at that point. But my understanding is that most of these were cleaned at some time towards the end of construction. So what you're seeing is what was either left over from construction or what was missed at that time.
Would you anticipate in a few years it's going to have to be gone around and cleaned again?
I don't know. I don't know how much there is.
Okay. My other question would be the appearance of the warping, buckling, and bulging of the joints, and you said a couple times the panels needed to be pre-curved. Is there any explanation why they weren't or wouldn't have been?
I don't know why the panels were not pre-curved. There's a lot of project documentation that we did not have to go through or did not see the need to go through. So we were dealing more in the facts that the panels were straight and they were put on and curved to the building rather than pre-curved.
Have you seen that in any other projects you've looked at in the past?
Yep, we've seen it at other projects, and we've seen pre-curved panels on other projects.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, Councilor Erickson?
Just piggybacking on that, the pre-curved ones, did it look the same way, or was it nice and smooth, or?
Yep, pre-curvature would allow you to have a smoother final surface.
Okay, and then I just have one other question. I do have a couple for Cotter when we get to that point. What, and maybe it's in the report, what would your best guess, life expectancy be of these panels? You know, with them consistently going in and out, and what you see with our ailments here in South Dakota, you know, we get extreme hot, we get extreme cold. That will put pressure on, as you said, in certain weak spots. You know, and if it's zipped, as you referred to, if that weak spot in the upper top corner goes, do we have to unzip the whole thing and redo it, or kind of a arrangement of questions there, but really the life expectancy of the panels?
Sure. We felt that the panels probably have a 30-plus year life expectancy, and the reason we made a recommendation for every 10 years is we felt that was a reasonable amount of time as you move forward to go back and inspect to make sure that nothing has deteriorated to the point where it's started to, again, crack or otherwise been affected by the thermal movements.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for being here this afternoon. We're definitely learning about something that is a little deeper than our engineering knowledge of most of us on the dais this afternoon. I guess my first group of questions have to do more of the background of how we got here, and then eventually we'll get to what we can do to move forward. Do you feel like you got access to everything you needed to help to put your report together? One of the things that we spent some time the first time around was talking about a preliminary report that we got from a consultant from Judd Allen that never got past the draft stage. Did you have access to that report as part of your background in your investigation and work in this process?
We did not have access, and we did not feel that we needed access. We had all the other documentation that we needed to prepare our opinion independently of what other experts had said.
Okay. One of the things that were in the RFP talked about doing thermal testing or more of the Tyvek barrier system, and I'm missing that, or maybe can you enlighten me a little bit about where you were able to look at the Tyvek? And one of the things you were talking about was a 180-degree swing of temperature movement, and I know Tyvek has about 175-degree before it starts to break down. So again, junior engineering helped me figure that out. So I guess
Sure.
That was about 6 questions all wrapped up in one. But
Sure, I'll try to take them one at a time. From the standpoint of the Tyvek, it's not getting the same temperatures that the panels are. Metal in sun gets hot to the touch, so it's surface temperature versus the air temperature that the Tyvek would see behind it, which is the cavity temperature of the air in front of the Tyvek. The RFP did ask for a lot of different things. We were pretty explicit in our response about what we were going to do and not do, and we viewed the need to do actual thermal temperature testing as not necessary if we could go through the calculation process first and understand what the temperature cycling is and what it was experiencing. We saw that, we went through that, and that was the analysis that we completed there. As far as, again, from a destructive opening standpoint to view the Tyvek, we determined that without a substantial amount of leakage coming through the building being reported by anybody, there was absolutely nothing being reported from the opaque wall system, that it was it would be a waste of time, money, and potential damage to the panels to try to go in and do the destructive opening at this time.
makes sense. Did you consider, as part of putting your proposal together, that maybe using some kind of camera or scope as a way to do an interior inspection? Would something like that, or would that again go past the money that was allotted? And
so again, no, not from that standpoint. From the exterior, you really would have to get through the metal panel. Again, you'd have to cut the panels in order to do that, and patching them would be difficult. From the interior, because of the spray foam insulation that's on the back of the blue board, there really wouldn't be anything to see in that cavity if you were to put a camera in there. Any water that gets into that space should already be readily visible because it's going to pool on your slab and damage the base of your interior gypsum sheathing.
Okay, Councilor Ralphie.
I wonder,
Were you
No,
done,
no, no, I'm
Councilor?
good. I'll come back. I'll wait
Okay.
because we're.
Councilor Ralphie.
I get a question just to follow up on the metal panels. You said about a 30-year life expectancy, the way they are now. If we had decided instead of to take the $1 million and said, nope, go ahead and get them pre-curbed, do them all, redo them, and do that, would the life expectancy of that siding be significantly different?
No, you just asked, the metal panels life expectancy is about the same regardless of whether it was pre-curved or put on the building.
Okay, so
Flat.
there's no difference in the 30-year. You'd say if we'd had them replaced and done all that,
Yeah.
you'd still be at 30 years?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we've done round one, so we'll go back to Councilor Neitzer.
Okay, thank you very much. I will say that I've spent a lot of time with MJ Dawson, who installed it, and in fact, I just talked to them on the phone today, and so I think the way that I understood it, the two panels go together, and there's a bead of silicone, and it might be that when it gets hot, for example, that is kind of leaking down, and then dirt sticks to that, and it's just a matter of you just need to wash it in lay terms. Does that sound in the ballpark?
Yeah, I don't know if there's actually a bead of silicone in every one of the male-female joints, but there is but it's essentially it's a butyl, not a silicone, per IMETCO's correspondence that they sent through during the project.
Okay. And then the line that I want to go through is really important because just for the confidence of the community, and I do want to say that I don't believe for a second that anything would have been done nefarious or you would have changed anything, but I need to ask it. How many drafts of reports were submitted to the city?
One.
Okay. Were there any substantive changes between the draft and the final report?
Not from the city's feedback.
Okay. What generally did the city ask you to change?
I did prepare a couple of slides thinking this might come up. So this would be one example. Essentially, there were some typos that were included in the draft report that the city pointed out. They were quick to point out that we had not listed in our scope of work that we were evaluating the backup waterproofing and air barrier system. And then something that would give you a sense on a type of language. We had a sentence here that said we did not observe any major signs of water leakage into the building. They said, can you be more precise with your terminology? What does major mean? We again then went back and was more precise about exactly what we meant. We did not observe any signs of water leakage through the opaque metal panel system.
Okay, very good. And so obviously, you stand by the accuracy of the report?
Yes, sir.
And were you asked or did you remove anything negative or embarrassing at the request of the city?
No.
Okay. Finally, I will just point out, just for clarification for everybody, the methodology in the RFP essentially let the proposers propose what they would propose to do. It didn't say that they would have to remove a panel or they would have to do. We left the expertise to them to tell us, what do you think that you should do? And yours was kind of a step-by-step approach, which was, let's start with taking a look, and if there's something that merits or necessitates that we should go to the next step, we could talk about that. And I'm taking from your results, you don't see anything that would necessitate or say that would be money well spent to start taking panels off or removing walls. The evidence just isn't there to support that.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think Councilor Starr, I know you had a follow-up question?
Yep. One of the things I think Councilor Rolfing pointed out was the would anything be significantly different if we would have done that? But at some point, you know, putting the timeline together in my head, someone decided to use these panels in a horizontal manner where if I'm looking at the manufacturer's recommendations, it's a vertical product. Am I right on that?
The panels can be used in either configuration, vertical or horizontal.
Okay, so it wasn't a major concern that we did them horizontal versus vertical, or that would void a warranty, or that they weren't installed the way the manufacturer to meet the warranty requirements.
IMECO would not have prepared shop drawings if it was not something that could be done in a horizontal manner.
Perfect. But doing it right is what we would have expected to had, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to make. To say that we got what we paid for probably isn't correct. They were at least places where it wasn't installed correctly. There are some places that, and that's what the legal settlement concluded, was that, yeah, it wasn't right, so this is the $500,000 or million or value or bucks or whatever we're calling the actual numbers are there. But I guess where I want to go next is help me with baselines for us to expect in the future. What should we be measuring as that goes along? Because part of what we're going to have to do as a council is establish budgets over the years for the maintenance that's going to be required to take care of this product. We'll have maintenance needs no matter, in lots of places in a building of this size. So what are the baselines we should be looking at for moving forward into replacement and basic maintenance of the facility over the next almost yearly, that we'll have some replacement that we need to do to stay ahead of the maintenance?
I'll go back to our recommendations slide here. The loose trim components is certainly one item that should be completed sooner rather than later. Based on what we saw, it's probably a week or two of somebody out there on a lift, finding them all and putting them back into place with either sealing them into place or fastening them into place. As to how much that actually costs is going to be dependent on how much there is and how much time they have to spend out there. We would estimate it's probably a 1 to 2 week type of exercise. Monitoring the windows during rain events is essentially a no-cost item. If there is leakage, then it's a different discussion altogether. Cleaning the butyl residue is, again, something that I think would be done as part of the loose trim component piece of it. And so, again, part of that 2 week or so process there. Inspecting the panels every 10 years means that the operator goes out and requests somebody to come in and do an inspection. That could be an engineering firm, whether it's somebody who's outside of the area who it doesn't have any tie to the project, or whether it's a local internal to Sioux Falls engineering firm, or whether it's a contractor or other city employees that are knowledgeable about the issue, which is looking for the potential of fatigue and cracking of the panels at the bulge locations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I've got then with that, I've got a question.
Were we going to have Mark Cotter come up too? I think.
Oh yes, we're not done.
Okay.
If I, because I have a number of questions of my own too. So with the council's permission, I'd like to ask a few. And maybe Director Cotter, this would be a great follow-up to Councilor Starr's question, because I sent that question to you yesterday about, or actually last evening. Has the cost of completing these recommendations been estimated? And can you also respond, because I think we're going to find the responses are going to be very, very similar. But and also, I'd ask, how do you perceive them being budgeted and dealt with?
Certainly. So first of all, the recommendation to observe the panels every 10 years we think is good practice, especially with this having a 30-year life. It allows us to go up. We do have a lot of weather in South Dakota, and just the last week we've gone from 40 above to 20 below, so it's a 60-degree temperature swing. So if we identify some of these small trim components that potentially can get stressed and pop off, we've got to make sure that we reattach those. In visiting with Scott Rust, and we don't expect that that's a very a big effort, but we haven't costed out any of the recommendations to start with, but that'll be those will be things that we'll start to do. On the more immediate ones that are to reattach a couple of the loose trim pieces, and then there's a few areas where the rivet simply pulled through. Scott will work with SMG and probably a local sheet metal panel manufacturer and get that work done. We expect it would be a fraction of the cost of what this study was, just to give you a perspective, okay? Monitor the windows, as Peter said, that's just mainly being inside during a heavy rain event, maybe on the side where the wind is actually blowing the rain on. And so you can actually observe, is there anything that's happening with the mullion system? All these systems over time age, and it's just good practice to keep an eye, just like this building, to keep a good eye on it to make sure it's still the healthy building. Cleaning the butyl residue, that would be done in conjunction with the loose trim pieces, I think we expect, right? And so they're already going to have to bring a lift out to go up, and so we would also have them as they go around. If they see any areas that have any of this residue, we'll have them take a cleaner up there that's appropriate for the finish of this system and clean those off. And so I think in general, we'll kind of work through, but we don't expect that this is much effort, certainly in the short term, to address the loose trim pieces and clean the butyl rope.
Okay, thank you. And Peter, if you would come back up, and then we can always call Director Cotter back up as well. I know that you've been questioned a couple of different times about the process that you used, removing panels versus not removing panels. In your professional opinion, what would have been gained, based on the information that you have, what would have been gained by removing panels?
We would have been able to see the Tyvek in its current condition after a few years of it being in operation. That would have been about the most we would have observed at that point if we had removed panels.
And based on the information you had received, is there any indication that the Tyvek had been failing?
There's been no indication that the Tyvek is failing.
Okay. And then also, following up with Councilor Neitzert's questions on the draft report, I think he did an excellent job, and I think it's behooves us to bring that up again. From draft report to the final report that I've marked up all over with yellow here with highlighters, has there been any significant changes from draft to final report at the city's request?
At the city's request, no.
Okay, and I think your words were not from city's feedback.
That's correct.
So any changes that took place from draft to final would have been additional calculations that you or members of your firm had made?
They were related to the calculations. They were related to an independent peer review that we submitted it to within the firm at the same time as we submitted the draft to the city, and further refinements of language.
And I'm going to go even further and be very blunt. So nothing is being hidden.
No, sir.
Anybody from draft to final report?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. I think I've got, I may have some other follow-up, but Councilor Neitzert.
Thank you again. Were the panels installed to the specifications that all the parties agreed to?
They were not installed to allow for the thermal expansion 180 degrees as specified.
Okay, and the construction drawings did show these installed on a curve, correct?
Yes, they did.
Would this have been visible on a mock-up when I say this, the deflection?
Depends on the size of the mock-up and how they put it together.
Okay. Do you see anything in the installation besides the gap that violates the manufacturer's specifications?
No, we did not.
Okay. If the panels were to fail, how would they fail? Are we just talking about just that look of deflection? I mean, would they crack or do anything? I mean, it's basically one humongous unit because they're all inside of each other, but I mean.
That's correct. The panels are all interlocked, If a panel was to fail, I would expect at the area where it is currently warped or bulged that with time that might start to crack due to thermal expansion and contraction.
And then going forward, do you have any guess as to what the arc of essentially kind of the perception would be? Like if it's, you know, if we say it's a 5 now, if it's going to just keep going downhill, or if we've kind of hit the low point and then it'll just stay? Because in the first years, many times, you know, expansion and contraction is the worst, and then
the expansion and contraction will be the same regardless, because it's all based on temperature swings.
Mm-hmm.
You've been through temperature swings already at this point, and so we don't expect it to get any worse than what it's already seen. But we do want to make sure that over time, which is the reason for the 10-year recommendation on reinspection of them, that it does not actually compromise the metal.
most likely in 10 years, if I looked at them, would I likely see pretty close to what I'm looking at now?
I would expect so.
Okay. All right. I'll defer for just a moment.
Okay, very good. Any other questions, or should we continue with Councilor Neitzer?
I have something else, but Counselor, this is kind of a, Counselor Neitzer, if he has some more things, he can.
Okay. All right, thank you. You can tell I've spent a lot of time on this. If we had installed these vertically, would we be here today? Would we have the same issue?
Depends on the end joints and how they did them.
Do you mean the gap at the swedge?
The swedge joint, yes.
Okay, whether there's enough tolerance for the expansion contraction?
That's correct.
But you wouldn't have I mean, we have the curve and you've got panels that are kind of under tension, whereas this way, presumably you wouldn't have that. Is that fair to say, or?
The curve in the cantilevering of the panel past the support and then pulling it together creates a weak point where then the expansion and contraction stresses can then build up and create the bulge. Even though we don't necessarily have the curve, if you went vertically, you still have, with the current joint, the inability for expansion and contraction to be accommodated, and so you would potentially see buildup of stress somewhere in the panel.
Did you happen to look at the manufacturer's specifications? Because I thought that they specified a different gap than the shop drawings did, and I was told that the manufacturer's specifications always govern over what, and I'm not in the construction industry, but
the shop drawings would be the final say, because those are how they're manufactured and then usually used as installation drawings.
okay. And then going forward, if one wanted it to look different, would we just apparently just have to do a different product, putting the same thing on again, even if you put it at the right gap? Would you expect something the same, or what would you think?
I expect that if you allowed for movement but still put a flat panel on a curved surface, you still could potentially see a ripple effect near the end joints.
Okay. And then in the specifications, it talks about oil canning is not a cause for product rejection.
That's correct.
Can you just explain oil canning and that versus what we see? Do we just see very excessive oil canning? What?
Oil canning is a warping of the metal due to the manufacturing process and the size of the sheets that usually come out of the manufacturing process. We don't see that here. What we see is a very specific location where the metal has actually warped and bulged. That can be that is explained by how it was installed and the stresses that are occurring on the panels.
Okay, so the difference between the natural waviness in the manufacturing process versus how it's installed is giving it that bend and that bulge.
That's correct.
That's the distinction. Let's see if there's anything else. Do you have a long-term recommendation on what somebody would do? Just would you just live with it, or?
Yeah, our long-term recommendation is to inspect it every 10 years and make sure that the metal does not actually crack.
And What was your impression of about the south wall as far as did it have how much deflection? To the extent it had issues, was that again because of the tolerance of the lack of the gap there?
That's correct. We saw the lack of tolerance in the gap is consistent throughout, and you don't see the same rippling effect at the flatter areas on the south and north.
Okay, and then maybe the last thing, in looking at the historical pictures, was this effect apparent during the, as it was going up? Could you see it in the pictures?
It did seem like you could see something in the pictures as construction was occurring. I think that was visible in some of the in-progress photos that I put up. Okay, thank you.
And then a couple of just follow-up questions, and then we'll come to you, Councilor Staley. So I guess first of all, for Councilor, well, I'll ask this question since you're standing at the podium. So it seems to me that our biggest concern out of what your recommendations are here and your findings would all evolve and revolve around where the panels butt together. In some cases, the spaces are tight, and the expansion and contraction could lead to fatigue of the panels over time, and therefore we should be doing the 10-year inspections. Is that what you would term the biggest point of concern for us as a city?
Yes.
The other items that you identified with the rivets and maybe some trim that's missing, those were fairly minor?
Those are minor pieces. However, right now they could potentially fall from the building.
A safety factor.
So right now it's a safety factor, but once those are taken care of.
And for that reason, those items should be taken care of as soon as possibly.
That's correct.
As soon as possible. Okay, very good. And then Director Cotter. I know that there's been some questions about warranty on this product and on this, specifically the siding panels. Do we still have a warranty on those panels?
We do. We have a 20-year finish warranty that went into effect in the fall of 14 when the building was substantially complete.
So any litigation and any settlement that the city reached here a while back, we did not release our rights to a warranty on any of the products used. So those warranties are still in place.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. Seems like we struck a chord here. Councilor Erickson.
Define finished warranty, a finished warranty.
So the finish, anytime you have a piece of metal, you essentially have to extend its life by trying to control or resist corrosion, and this will be another good point for. And so it's the paint system, if you will, that's on the panels that we want to make sure that that system is in place solidly for the 20 years to make sure that it can be maintained at that finish quality. And then ultimately, it's the protector of the metal.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Neitzer, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I would just state, it was a finish warranty which covers that finish, and it wouldn't be the structural, like if a panel would break, as an example. And then, for what it's worth, as a part of the settlement, obviously, we can't go back on anybody going forward for any sort of action because it's already been settled for what it was. So.
And that does bring up a very good, valid point. And that's one of the reasons why we are here today, because we wanted to have this resolved, that we do have a structurally sound building. And if there are any issues, that we know how to move forward and address those issues in a prudent fashion. And so now it's up to us to employ whatever measures that are necessary and follow up on the recommendations of Peter and his crew.
That's correct. And I think, too, just to, because when we heard the recommendation and one of the key conclusions on the thermal expansion, just to give you some perspective on that, so in a 3-foot span of between two vertical struts where panels are attached and then ultimately there's a swedge joint that joins them, in a 3-foot area, this panel has the ability over a 180-degree temperature swing to expand 4/100 of an inch. Most of these are at midpoint, and if they were installed at, say, 60 degrees outside, okay, so now you're not even in that full temperature swing, but 4/100 of an inch is just over the thickness of your credit card, or about 10 sheets of copy paper. So when we're talking about thermal expansion, it's a very small amount, and when we then follow it up with our architecture team, you know, we certainly recognize that and respect the findings that Peter and his team came with, but that's also gives us the confidence that says it is metal. Just like our streets expand and contract, the same thing that happens on buildings with the different temperatures, different materials expand and contract. This one will as well. I just wanted to give you a perspective on what is 4/100 of an inch. It's basically, if it went across that full 3-foot point, it's basically 10 sheets of copy paper, okay? So it's very small, okay?
Okay, thank you. Councilor Staley.
Okay, well, you know, I think I said this several months ago when this all started. To me, the issue is where have we been, where are we at, and where are we going? And the reason that any of this is happening has to do with secrecy and confidentiality. We had a secret settlement agreement. The Argus Leader, to their credit, had a lawsuit that opened it up. And after that happened, then we started moving and evaluating and getting to this point. I did want to talk about, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit here because it's going to lead into what I want to see happen. But I think we need to show our citizens now more than ever that we are respecting the process and that they have a right to public information as well as the council has a right to that. I'm going to talk about legal fees because it's going to play into what I want to do here. But I wanted to talk about our recent outside legal fees that we do bring in legal counsel. Out of the park budget, we used our first penny to Greenfield and Rotert for the golf course management agreement. We paid that company $25,000 to negotiate that controversial golf course agreement that we had over the Christmas vacation. So we paid them $250 an hour or $25 for every 6 minutes. And a thought came to me today when I found this out that we could certainly trim a lot of trees for $225,000 that we paid in legal fees and alleviate the burden off of our project trim. However, then we also paid we've got a contract for $20,000 to the same company, an outside company, Greenfield and Rotert, for legal assistance in the railroad redevelopment project. Do you have these, Jim? This is the sheet that's... So we're paying outside legal fees services $20,000 to help with the railroad redevelopment project. And I don't know which, they didn't know which fund this was coming from, but we're thinking it's from the first penny. So case in point, we're spending $20,000 in outside legal firms coming in to help to advise our city. So speaking of the legal fees, the City Council, for the public watching, we have $12,000 set aside for legal counsel in our budget. And my understanding is we've never utilized this. And councilors, if you would please listen. I don't speak when you're speaking.
Councilor Staley,
okay, I will continue. So what I wanted to talk about is what action is needed to utilize this money within our budget so that we can bring in some outside legal counsel. Many citizens and council members wanted to see the Judd Allen draft report. I asked for it. I was told we can't see it. And I also asked to see this recent draft report. Now, we're being told, trust us. Everything's on the up and up. But I think the citizens they would like to see the draft report. I would like to see the draft report. And I would like to have an outside legal opinion as to whether that's something that we can see, so that we don't have to ask this gentleman coming from Chicago to stand up and tell us that everything is as it should be. Even if we see it in executive session, I think as council members we have a right to see that report. I've talked with citizens. They'd like to see that report. The city had it, my understanding is, for a week before you released anything on it. So I'm wanting to discuss how this looks. If we want to bring forth a motion to get a second opinion, is that something that is it going to be a resolution? We've never done it before, so that. No, I understand we can't, but I think we can discuss it here. We can't discuss it at 7 o'clock. And this, to me, I think our next move, to me, just to show the citizens, hey, the draft report, the final report, everything washes together, everything's the same. And do I just need a second on that to bring it forth at the next meeting? So we would vote on whether we would have an independent attorney give us an opinion. And it's never been done before, but if we have $12,000 sitting in our account for outside legal opinions, and as I said before, our other departments are spending thousands of dollars bringing in outside legal counsel, I think we have a right for the citizens to do it. And Jim David has it up from our operations manual here that we absolutely can do that.
Seeing no response from other councilors, no comments or questions of Councilor Staley?
How you'd move forward with that?
Go ahead, Councilor Neitzer.
I think we had discussed in operations it would take a consensus of the council to use money for outside legal services, and I don't know if that's defined how that would happen, if that would be, a resolution, or if it would be just a.
Mr. David, would you address that? Because we do understand that we can't take any action at an informational meeting, but if this was something the council wished to do, what would the process be?
Well, the procedures manual that the city council has approved does say it has to be by a majority of the council. So as Councilor Staley had stated, it would have to be at a regular meeting. It'd have to be by a majority. So we could look at doing it by a motion or by a resolution. But the majority of the council has to approve utilizing these funds according to the procedures manual that you all had approved.
So it would have to be done at our 7 o'clock city council meeting by motion or resolution, and it would require a majority of the council.
And how would you determine which law firm would be doing it? Because wouldn't that have to be done? I mean, is that, if I wanted to bring this forward, would I say like Meyer Henry would be the firm at the time, or?
We're in uncharted territories with that, so it would the council itself would have to determine those professional services. You could look at a committee, leadership, somebody making that determination on which firm you would end up going with. And you would have to have a clear scope identified in moving forward with that law firm. Because you wouldn't want to continue, because you know how attorney hours can add up. You'd want to make sure you have a clear scope and guidance before moving forward with that law firm.
Okay, so thank you.
Okay.
Any other? Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Peter, if you could step up, please. I just want to say thanks for being here. I know that we had a lot of questions for you. You handled yourself very professional, and I appreciate you going into the detail that you did. Many of us are learning a lot of new things about this, and so thank you for explaining it in ways that we can all try to understand this. This came to fruition from the council in collaboration with the administration to try to put to rest what is or is not going on. And so having this very detailed document, to me, is worth the effort, worth the money, worth having that peace of mind of where we are and what does it look like. We certainly have some areas to address. We heard from Director Cotter that you have a plan to move forward and what that looks like. I know you're not standing here as an attorney, and so we kind of got off on a different topic for a little bit. But for you, you were hired as an expert. We don't have someone on staff that can do what you did. And we also wanted an independent analysis of someone that was not from within the council or within the administration or any of that. So you providing that information in that document to us was very beneficial. And for me personally, it really answered a ton of questions to me, as well as many of my constituents that had reached out over the weekend and had some questions for me and wanted clarification, some in the construction industry, some just average citizens that are just interested in our asset being protected. So thank you. I hope you didn't have a plane to catch tonight, but I really appreciate you being here and answering our questions today. So thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And I would like to echo some of that anyway, and thank you for the report. I'll have to say that I was moving through the report fairly well up until page 15. The calculations, the wind load calculations, and then on 16, the thermal expansion calculations. That required going back and rereading and then rereading a few times. So it was challenging, but yet it was the type of challenge that I enjoy as well too. So very detailed report. And thank you for the recommendations, because I think that's the most important thing that we need to take from this is what do we need to do to protect our building, to ensure that it's going to be here to serve the citizens of Sioux Falls. So, Peter, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate the time and the questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Can we move into executive session discussing the qualifications, competence, performance, character, or fitness of any public officer or employee or prospective public employee, officer or employee? The term employee does not include any independent contractor.
You'd like to make that motion?
Yes. Well, yeah.
Okay, and we discussed this earlier. We should do just a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, we're moving into executive session. So if we could have members in the audience clear the chambers now.